So this is the second video with using SOHCAHTOA about sine, cosine, and tangent in our trigonometry unit. Okay, so what happens when we know an angle measure and one segment length? So let's use our knowledge of special right triangles, and we'll say that this is a 45, 45, 90 triangle. All right, so we know that both of these angles are 45, and we know how to fill this out, right? X root 2. So that's our knowledge from special right triangles. So let's try for a moment. So let's approximate the sine of 45. I don't really know what that is, but I can figure it out, right? So let's say that we're going to use this angle right here, okay? So the sine of 45, well, let's think, right? We have SOHCAHTOA, so that's going to be important. All right, sine is opposite over hypotenuse, so opposite is x over our hypotenuse, which is x root 2. Well, what do I notice? Well, I see that I have x over x, and that becomes 1, so I'm left with 1 over root 2. Now, we all know that that's bad, right? So we have to rationalize our denominator, and so we're left with the square root of 2 over 2. Okay, so that means that we think that the sine of 45 is about square root of 2 over 2. Well, let's see. Let's plug in the square root of 2 over 2 into our calculator, and I see that I get something that's approximately 0.7071. Now, let's look in our book on page 500. So take a minute and see if you can either find that or just wait. So given this image over here on the right-hand side, if we look for sine of 45, so that means that we're going to look under the angle right here at 45, and we're going to see right next to it that's the sine of that angle. So it tells us that the sine of 45 is approximately 0.7071, and that's because we found that right down here. All right, now look at that. Wow, that's exactly what we were trying to find, okay? So thinking about what we can do, all right, we know that how to do the signs. We're now going to be able to try to go backwards. Okay, so let's expand this a little bit. So let's say that I have this right here, this triangle, and I know this is A, this is B, this is 10 inches, and we're going to call this 15 degrees. And I want to find A rounded to the nearest tenth. Okay, so in this case, we know something a little bit different, all right? So let's say, all right, so what do I know? Well, I have information about the hypotenuse, and I have information about the angle, and I want to find this. So thinking about my 3 trig functions, which one would be the best option? Well, I have to go all the way across, so that would be opposite, so that's either one of these, and then I have my hypotenuse, so that means the tangent can't happen, so we're going to use sine. So let's say, so the sine of 15 is equal to the opposite, or A, over the hypotenuse, which is 10. So this is the same thing as 10 times sine of 15, and that's going to equal A. So let's look back at that diagram, or that picture from table from page 500. So looking at this table, we want sine of 15. So if I look over here, 15 is right there, so I'm going to use that. So I have 10 times 0.2588, and that's going to equal A. And if I multiply that by 10, I get that A is 2.588. Now I have to go back up to the directions because it says nearest tenth. So that means that A is going to equal 2.6 because the 5 gets bumped up. We also can't forget our unit, so inches. Okay, so now your turn. Find B, rounded to the nearest tenth, given this diagram. Okay, so as his fishing boat moves into bay, Hayden notices that the angle of elevation to the top of the lighthouse is 11 degrees. If the lighthouse is 200 feet tall, how far is the boat from the lighthouse? In order to solve this, we need to know two things. So let's first talk about the angle of elevation. Okay, so the angle of elevation would be if we're standing right here and I'm looking out over something, right? And I look up. This right here is called my angle of elevation. All right, so we're quote unquote looking up. So if you were to put your arm straight out in front of you and then look between from your arm and you were to tilt your head up, that's what would be the angle of elevation. There's another one that we have called the angle of depression. And that's exactly the opposite of angle of elevation. So if I'm standing here and if I'm looking out, I have my arm out in front of me, let's say, and I look down to the ground because there's a bug there. This is my angle of depression. So we're quote unquote looking down. Okay, so depression, you're kind of down. Elevation, you're rising up. Okay, so we need to figure out what this is. So first, when you have something like this, like a word problem, what we want to do is we want to draw a picture. So if I have a lighthouse and a boat, so let's say I have a boat and I have the water, and let's say that this is my lighthouse. That looks like a tree, but you get the idea. All right, and I know that this is 200 feet tall, and I know that the angle of elevation is 11 degrees. So that means from the base of the water going up to the top of the lighthouse, this is 11 degrees. And I want to know how far away the boat is from the lighthouse. So that's going to be this part right here. So let's call it X. So let's think, using our trig functions, which one is going to be the best option? All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, SOHCAHTOA, that's what's important here. So let's write that somewhere so we can figure it out. We know that the water and the lighthouse make a 90-degree angle, so hypotenuses are not going to be used at all. So the only option is going to be tangent. So the tangent of 11 degrees is equal to opposite, which is 200 divided by x. Or we can think of it as x equals 200 divided by the tangent of 11. Now you might have noticed in your book that we don't have any table for cosine or tangent. And that's because we can use our calculator. So why don't you take a moment and get out your calculator. So this is what your calculator looks like. Just looking at it, you can see a few things. What you're first going to want to do is to make sure that at the top of the calculator that it says degrees. Right now mine says radian. That's not good. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on this button called mode. It's located right here. And once you've clicked mode, you're going to see this screen. You're going to want to use the down arrow twice in order to get down to this row right here. This should say radian, and then you should see degree right next to it. After that, you're going to use the right arrow and highlight degree. So now you should see over here that degree is highlighted. So see the difference between what it was before? It was all black around radian, and now it's going to be black around degree. Once you have that highlighted with that arrow, go ahead and hit enter down here at the bottom. And then all you have to do is hit this blue button and then click mode again, and you're going to quit out of that. So that's going to be the way that you're always going to want to make sure that it's in degree. And you can even tell at the top. Before it had all of this stuff at the top where it had radian, and now you can tell that it's switched into degree mode. So that's perfect. So now take a look on your calculator. Do you see these three buttons right here in the middle, sine, cosine, and tangent? Well, those are going to be your favorite buttons for right now. So let's go ahead and do tangent of 11 degrees, right, to be able to finish off our last problem. So go ahead and click tangent, and then 1, 1, and then don't forget to close the parentheses. So it's going to look something like this. So as you can tell, I have tangent of 11 right here, and then this is the answer that it popped out for me. So now let's go back and use this in our problem. So once we have that, we want to know what x is. So before, we saw something like x is equal to 200 divided by the tangent of 11. We can do this two ways, so I'm going to show you. The first way we can do is we can keep the tangent of 11 just as it is, and we can divide 200 by that number. So what we're going to do is you're going to end up typing, so in your next line after you have tangent of 11 enter, you're going to click 200 divided by, now see down here at this one you see A and S right above? Well, that's going to be where you go second and that button, and what that's going to do is pull your previous answer. So it'll look something like this. So all that did was it took my previous answer of tangent of 11 and it plugged it in right there for A and S. So that's 200 divided by the tangent of 11 gives me this. Another way would be to be able to plug it all in at one time into your calculator, and it would look something like this. So what you see over here now is I did it all in one step. I took 200 and I divided it by the tangent of 11, and what do you notice? I get the exact same thing. So it's really important that we understand how to use our calculator. The ending parentheses here in the tangent is also very important. So let's round to the nearest tenth to be able to answer this question. So we found that x is equal to 1028.910803, and that's not what we want. So we want x to be 1028.9. Now don't forget our unit. Before we talked about 200 feet tall, so that means that we're over 1,000 feet away from the lighthouse. So this would be your final answer, something like 1028.9 feet. So last but not least, we have some more important things to think about. We have some other ideas and other trigonometric functions, and they look a little different. So we have this thing called cotangent. We have one called cosecant, and we have one called secant. And now I'm sure you've heard the lines tangent and secant from circles, but these are a little different. So cotangent we abbreviate as COT, cot. Cosecant is CSC, and secant would be SEC. Okay, so some important things to keep in mind. When we talk about cotangent of theta, what that really means is 1 over the tangent of theta, which could also be the same thing if we think about SOHCAHTOA, which I can write over here. All right, we know tangent is opposite over adjacent, so cotangent would be adjacent, and I'm just going to abbreviate it like that, over opposite. We have the cosecant of theta, and cosecant is 1 over sine of theta. Sine's usually opposite over hypotenuse, so in this case it would be hypotenuse over opposite. Last but not least, secant theta, and what do you think that is? 1 over cosine of theta. So again, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, so secant would be hypotenuse over adjacent. Now why don't you go ahead and take some time and practice in your calculator. I want you to practice 3 and figure out how you would do them. So let's go ahead and practice the secant of 84 degrees, the cotangent of 51 degrees, and cosecant of 37 degrees. Take a moment and see if you can figure out how to do those in your calculator, and we'll pick up there tomorrow.